Hello everybody and welcome back to another Used Tech Hustle video. Now if you're anything like me, you're always on the lookout for a bargain to hustle or flip. And today's gem I managed to find on an eBay listing a few months ago, if you may have seen in my pickups video, and it's a really nice little first generation HP system from way back in 2010. Now before we go into its current state, if we look at the original specification for this system, it came with a i7-870 CPU, which was the top CPU for this particular series. It has the 8GB DDR3 RAM, which is 1333 MHz. The original GPU supplied in this model was the NVIDIA GeForce GT440 with a whopping 1.5GB of onboard memory. So at the time, certainly a very capable machine. Some notable extras on this model would be the 1.5TB of hard drive space it originally came with, inbuilt wireless, a digital TV tuner, and even a Blu-ray drive. So, pretty feature packed for the age, certainly one of the more expensive models. Something else to note would be the high user review score from Review. It's worth noting that anybody that did have the system was usually pretty happy with it in most cases, as you can see, and just goes to show it was a very well-spec'd system for the time. Now turning our attention to my specific machine, what you'll notice is it has been clearly well loved as it's been upgraded quite heavily. You'll see the hard drive is now a 500GB Samsung Evo SSD, and the memory has been doubled using crucial DDR3 RAM at 1600 MHz, which is quite interesting because the machine only supports up to 1333, so that's quite a nice little bonus I suppose for when I decide to reuse them. Here you can see the GT440, which is certainly a little bit small by today's standards, but for the time it offers everything you would want, like a DVI, HDMI, etc., and definitely super suitable for a 9-year-old machine. But I did want to whip this out and upgrade it for something slightly better in the form of this GTX 760 I managed to pick up recently also. So altogether we're looking at just over £60 for the entire thing, including this graphics card, which I think would be a really good idea to see exactly how much you can get out of such little amount of money. So before putting this machine through its paces, I decided to do a couple of little upgrades. The first one would be to install my 1TB games hard drive so I didn't have to re-download them all again, and the next one was of course installing the GTX 760. Now the only thing I should point out, the GTX 760 did need an additional power connector, however I was able to use one of those SATA to 6-pin PCIe connections and it was perfectly fine. And for anyone wondering, the PSU in this particular model is 460 watts, so although it's kind of touching the line, it's worked perfectly fine throughout all my tests. There's no problem there at all. Sorry about the potato footage by the way, I'm just getting used to my new camera and I clearly had the ISO setting way up. Yeah, sorry about that. Once the hard drive and graphics card were all installed, all I had to do next was fire it up and do some benchmarks. Now before we get into the meat, I did want to check what Cinebench score this CPU would get, and it actually was quite healthy really at 444. Obviously it's not going to be beating any Ryzens anytime soon, but for a cheap system like this, that's pretty good. Then I also quickly ran Crystal Disk to see what kind of condition the SSD was in, and well, frankly I was shocked. It's in better condition than some of the ones I run which I've had from new, so yeah, that's a bit of a win. With that said, the only thing left to do now is fire up some games, run some benchmarks and see how this puppy performs. First up, I've got a new one to my collection, which is Subnautica. I got this recently free thanks to a Discord user who flagged it up, and yeah, it's a hell of a game. And as you can see by the averages and lows, it runs very well at 1080p on this setup with the 760 GTX. If you haven't played this game already, I would strongly suggest to check it out, although it's not currently free. It's definitely worth a look. Next up, I've got the brand new free-to-play game that everyone's talking about, and frankly I can see why, because it's absolutely brilliant. We've got Apex Legends. Now I'm running this on the medium to low settings, which I just wanted to give this whole system a chance considering it is a brand new game. And as you can see, you get a very respectable average of 55.8. It's fairly solid as well with decent lows. The game itself ran very fluidly, I will admit. And well, if you haven't played this game already, please take my word for it and do so. It's a cracker. Another new one for my benchmarks here, which is Rise of the Tomb Raider. On medium settings, this was also very playable and quite solid as well. Just under 40 FPS average with decent lows and 0.1% lows. Definitely playable if you haven't checked this one out. An old system like this with an even fairly old graphics card definitely can handle it. Not a problem at all. Very impressive. The Division up next, thanks to this month's Humble Bundle. And yeah, very impressive looking game, and on mixed settings with mainly medium to high, we're around about 37 FPS, which from a console perspective is very good. I'm certainly not expecting massive figures for a budget system with an older card. Yeah, very playable indeed. Definitely a game that I'm going to put some time into, I think. Project Cars 2 next, a fairly recent one to my benchmarks. Despite my truly terrible gameplay, I really have only played this game to benchmark it, but it looks just stunning. And yeah, this card and setup seems to eat it up as well. Just under 60 FPS average, very decent lows as well, fairly stable. All in all, very playable, very nice game. Although, again, I am awful at it, I do need to get some practice in. Doom up next, again fairly playable at 30 FPS. Certainly wouldn't bother me playing the game at this. I did have it on high settings just to kind of push things a little. You could of course drop this down, maybe drop it down to 720p as well if you're looking for very high frame rates. But as far as I'm concerned, this is another tick in the box. Very playable for a budget system. You couldn't really ask for more. Next up we've got a classic, City Skylines, which I do love to benchmark. Typically this is a game that never seems to reach high frame rates even on my own main system, and yeah, this is just like every other system I seem to put it on. It runs very solidly around about 30 FPS. Because of the style of game, you don't really need massive frames per second to enjoy it. If you haven't played this one, I definitely would suggest it, and if you've got an old system you want to play it on, pop a decent graphics card and you'll be laughing, just like you see here. Dirt Rally next. On the high preset, this was a very smooth 65.6 FPS. Now the average, as you can see, is fairly good. The lows are also fairly solid. So if you're into zipping around in mud and generally trying to strive for control of the car, this computer and this particular setup will run this classic game very easily. Unsurprisingly, CSGO, despite my cringeworthy gameplay, ran buttery smooth with very good averages around 127 FPS. The lows were a bit lower than I would have expected. I'm thinking this could have been down to connection issues, as normally this is a lot more stable than this, but I will say that playing it I didn't notice any difference at all. So yeah, just like all the others you're seeing here, this old i7 together with an older card, just not a problem at all for esports titles like this. Next up we check out PUBG's new map, and yeah, as you can see, very respectable averages, definitely playable. If you're still playing this game and you want to set up a PC to play it on a budget, then an old i7 together with an old 760, brilliant choice, definitely worth it, definitely playable. As much as I can't stand it, I did have to include Fortnite here, and yeah, as you can see on the high settings, an average of 60 FPS, which I think most people would strive for. Very playable indeed. Although this game is very much not one I would choose to play nowadays, especially with the advent of Apex Legends. If it's your cup of tea, 1080p with this setup, easy peasy, all day long. So there we go. As if proof was ever needed, this old machine can certainly keep up with today's titles, and as far as I'm concerned, offers a very good value if you can pick one up for a decent price. Now, although I've kept things on a budget using a 760 GTX, I would say that you can go up to maybe even a 1060 without any problems and still be able to play current titles with no issues at all. So on that happy note, it's time to end this review. I do hope you've enjoyed it. If you have, then consider dropping a like on it. If you've really liked it, then a subscription would be fantastic. Or just let me know what you think in the comments, I'd love to hear from you. Anyway, if you want to see more like this, do check out my other videos. Other than that, see you next time, and keep on hustling, guys.